Frankenstein, Volume 3, Chapter 4. I was soon introduced into the presence of the magistrate, an old, benevolent man with calm and mild manners. He looked upon me, however, with some degree of severity, and then turning towards my conductors, he asked who appeared as witnesses on this occasion. About a half a dozen men came forward, and one being selected by the magistrate, he deposed that he had been out fishing the night before with his son and brothers-in-law, Daniel Nugent. As he was proceeding along the sands, he struck his foot against something. His companions came up, and by the lighting of their lantern, they found the body of a man, who was, to all appearances, dead. Their first supposition was that it was some person who had drowned and was thrown on shore by the waves. But upon examination, they found that the clothes were not wet, and even that the body was not then cold. He appeared to be about 25 years of age. He had apparently been strangled, for there were no sign of any violence except the black marks of the fingers on his necks. The first part of his deposition did not in the least interest me. But when the mark of the fingers was mentioned, I remembered the murder of my brother and felt myself extremely agitated. My limbs trembled and a mist came over my eyes, which obliged me to lean on a chair for support. The magistrate observed me with a keen eye and, of course, drew an unfavorable augury from my manner. The son confirmed his father's account, but when Daniel Nugent was called, he swore positively that he saw a boat with a single man in it at a short distance from the shore, and as far as he could judge by the light of a few stars, it was the same boat in which I had just landed. A woman deposed that about an hour before she heard of the discovery of the body, she saw a boat with only one man in it push off from that part of the shore where the corpse was afterwards found. And several other men were examined concerning my landing, and they agreed that with the strong north wind that had arisen during the night, it was very probable that I had beaten about for many hours and had been obliged to return nearly to the same spot from which I had departed. Mr. Kerwin, on hearing this evidence, desired that I should be taken into the room where the body lay for intermittent, that it might be observed what effect the sight of it would produce upon me. I entered the room where the corpse lay and was led up to the coffin. How can I describe my sensations on beholding it? The trial, the presence of the magistrate and witnesses, passed like a dream from my memory, and when I saw the lifeless form of Henry Clerval stretched before me, have my murderous machinations deprived you also, my dearest Henry, of life? The human frame could no longer support the agonizing suffering that I endured, and I was carried out of the room in strong convulsions. A fever succeeded to this. I lay for 2 months on the point of death. My ravings, as I afterwards heard, were frightful. I called myself the murderer of William, of Justine, and of Clerval. Sometimes I entreated my attendants to assist me in the destruction of the fiend by whom I was tormented, and at others I felt the fingers of the monster already grasping my neck, and screamed aloud with agony and terror. Why did I not die? How many youthful lovers have been one day in the bloom of health and hope, and the next to pray for worms and the decay of the tomb? Of what materials was I made that I could thus resist so many shocks, which, like the turning of the wheel, continually renewed the torture? But I was doomed to live, and in 2 months found myself in a prison stretched on a wretched bed. The whole series of my life appeared to me as a dream. I sometimes doubted if indeed it were all true, for it never presented itself to my mind with the force of reality. As the images that floated before me became more distinct, I grew feverish. A darkness pressed around me. No one was near me who soothed me with the gentle voice of love. No dear hand supported me. Who could be interested in the fate of a murderer but the hangman who would gain his fee? One day, when I was gradually recovering, I was seated, my eyes half open, my cheeks livid like those in death. I was overcome by gloom and misery. At one time, I considered whether I should not declare myself guilty and suffer the penalty of the law, less innocent than poor Justine had been. The door of my apartment was opened, and Mr. Kerwin entered. His countenance expressed sympathy and compassion. He drew a chair close to mine and addressed me in French. It was not until a day or two after your illness that I thought of examining your dress, that I might discover some trace by which I could send to your relations an account of your misfortune and illness. I found several letters, and among others one which I discovered from its commencement to be your father. I instantly wrote to Geneva. Nearly 2 months have elapsed since the departure of my letter, but you are ill. Even now you tremble. You are unfit for agitation of any kind. This suspense is 1,000 times worse than the most horrible events. Tell me, what new scene of death has been acted, and whose murder I am now to lament? Oh, your family is perfectly well, and someone, a friend, is come to visit you. I know not by what chain of thought the idea presented itself, but it instantly darted into my mind that the murderer had come to mock at my misery and taunt me with the death of Clerval as a new incitement for me to comply with his hellish desires. I put my hand before my eyes and cried out in agony, "Oh, take him away! I cannot see him! For God's sake, do not let him enter!" Mr. Kerwin regarded me with a troubled countenance. He could not help regarding my exclamation as a presumption of my guilt, and said in a rather severe tone, "I should have thought, young, that the presence of your father would have been welcome, instead of inspiring such violent repugnance." My father? Nothing at this moment could have given me greater pleasure than the arrival of my father. I stretched out my hand to him. "Are you then safe? And Elizabeth?" My father calmed me with assurance of their welfare. "What place is this that you inhabit, my son? You travel to seek happiness, but a fatality seems to pursue you, and poor Clerval! Alas, yes, my father, some destiny of the most horrible kind hangs over me, and I must live to fulfill it." The appearance of my father was to me like that of a good angel. I had already been 3 months in prison, and although I was still weak and in continual danger of a relapse, I was obliged to travel nearly 100 miles to the county town where the court was held. I saw around me nothing but a dense and frightful darkness, penetrated by no light but the glimmer of two eyes that glared upon me. Sometimes they were the expressive eyes of Henry languishing in death, the dark orbs nearly covered by the lids and the long black lashes that fringed them. Sometimes it was the watery, clouded eyes of the monster, as I first saw them in my chamber at Ingolstadt. The grand jury re-elected the bill on its being proved that I was on the Orkney Islands at the hour the body of my friend was found, and a fortnight after my removal I was liberated from prison and allowed to return to my native country. He may be innocent of the murder, but that has certainly a bad conscience.